tell it that that's okay. Now I'm situated. Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Litz, and I am the president-elect of the National Council of Jewish Women, who, in coordination with JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council, is sponsoring this program today about the Missouri legislature's recent, somewhat amazing bipartisan compromise legislation on some really significant criminal justice reform. So joining us today is Senator Brian Williams, and hopefully very soon, Representative Shamed Dogan. Both of those guests were critically involved in the passage of an amazing array of criminal justice reforms in this year's session. Those are reforms that both of our organizations, as well as many others, have been literally working on for years. And they were able to do that in obviously a political climate that's very challenging to bipartisan work, not to mention, a COVID-19 pandemic. And these two gentlemen were quite literally, to borrow a phrase, in the rooms where it happened. So let me introduce Senator Williams, who is a Democrat elected to the Missouri Senate in 2018, and he is the first Black male senator in over 2 decades. He represents the 14th senatorial district, which includes University City. His background, an education in government and public health policy, led him to pursue a career in public service. He worked for several years as a congressional staffer in Washington, D.C., and specifically oversaw the rollout of the Affordable Care Act marketplace for Missouri as a congressional ACA coordinator. Among his other local activities, he also serves as a board chair for the People's Health Center, where he helped develop a behavioral care center for children in underserved communities. Representative Dogan is a Republican who represents the 98th district, which includes parts of Ballwin, Ellisville, Fenton, and Wildwood. He was first elected in 2014 and elected to 2 successive terms since then. And he chairs the House Special Committee on Criminal Justice, which was created to craft policy solutions for public safety and to address some of the overcrowding issues in our state's prison system. His degree is in political science and philosophy, which led him to work for the Republican National Senatorial Committee as a legislative assistant for Senator Jim Talent, where he advised the senator on issues including transportation, immigration, and Second Amendment rights. Before being elected to the legislature, he served as an alderman representing Ballwin's 2nd Ward, and he is currently on the board of Epworth Children and Family Services, among many others. We're going to ask these two gentlemen to take us behind the scenes and let us see, to coin a phrase, how the sausage was made, legislatively speaking. And I will tell you right now that it is a very complicated and winding story, and was frankly a nail biter right to the finish line. It begins with 2 very different proposals. You may already be familiar with Senate Bill 60 because Senator Williams did a program for us earlier in the year to explain that proposal for a number of common sense criminal justice and police reforms, which we of course actively supported. The other proposal in question, Senate Bill 26, which was commonly referred to as the anti-protest bill, and was like other bills filed literally all across the country as part of the backlash to the protests after the murder of George Floyd. And obviously our organization opposed that one. So I want to start today by asking Senator Williams, what was in the original SB 60? And could you tell a little bit about the groundwork that you had laid in advance to cultivate support for that?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to say good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank all of the partners. I think it's really important that we understand that having advocacy and partners on the ground to be able to inform the public, not only about things that are happening in Jefferson City, but really how do we really ensure that good policies are being implemented in our state. So clearly, I want to thank all of our partners, JCRC, NCJWSTL, and of course, everyone that's tuning in today. As I was looking through the participants, I see so many of my friends and neighbors, and I'm really grateful that they're all on and just really hearing the backstory on this process, because it's a very convoluted process, and I hope that I could articulate it in a way that folks really understand. So for me, it goes back to last year's special session. I asked the governor to take up police reform during a special session that he wanted to address violent crime in the city of St. Louis. The governor decided not to expand that call, but in return, we moved forward with removing the residency in the city of St. Louis, which I was one of 3 senators strongly opposed to it, and a witness protection program. And then the governor recommended and asked would I consider bringing it up in January. So from that special session, my staff and we started traveling throughout the entire state of Missouri, talking to members of law enforcement, talking to various groups, clearly the partners we have on here today that's hosting, but also groups like the ACLU. We spoke with the National Association of Social Workers, so many different groups in Springfield, in Jefferson City, Kansas City. I went down to Cape Girardeau, and then clearly here in St. Louis, where I live and represent. And what we noticed immediately was that there had been so many years of folks that would come together and really find solace in just disagreeing. And it goes back to my foundation on why I ran for office. In 2018, when I decided to run for state senate, I ran for 2 reasons. One, my grandmother and mom said it was okay. And two, I really got tired of Democrats and Republicans fighting each other and not bringing any results back to our community. So, it's folks that are far less fortunate than all of us who get up every day and work with people they don't like. And if they don't do their job at a high level, they're fired. So that was the approach that I took coming into the legislature. But anyway, we took up police reform in January. And after spending almost a year just traveling all over the state, talking to people, we created, I won't say a stakeholder group, but a conversation that had really never happened before. And we had folks that were actually engaging. Some days were better than others, but I understood 2 things throughout this process. One, and it came after a law enforcement officer asked me, what do you know about policing? And why do you feel that you're qualified to focus on policies that impact members of law enforcement if you've never been a police officer? And I said, you're right, I've never been a police officer, but I do know that George Floyd could have easily been me. And I don't want what happened to Minneapolis to happen here in the state of Missouri. And that really kind of got the ball moving. So, one of our strategies that we used was we made sure that the issue stayed front and center. We talked about it at every meeting with every person in every group. I mean, we did countless, a lot of that I did just town halls, spoke with so many different groups about the issue, and we always kept an open mind. Now, we've learned from failures of the past. I mean, this was the first time we implemented any reforms since the death of Michael Brown over 7 years ago. And a lot of people walk away from the table when they don't get everything they want in the first meeting. And that strategy only ensures that you get nothing at all. So that was pretty much the approach that we took up into the session. And I want to kind of stop there. But it was really just a year just talking to folks and engaging folks and staying very diligent about the issue and making sure that it stayed front and center of everything that we were doing.
Thanks, Senator. I wonder if you could go just a step further and itemize for our participants the key issues that original bill addressed. And I believe Cheryl has a slide with that as well, because as I told you all, this is a complicated story. So we want to give it to you both visually and verbally. Not that you're not all brilliant people, but I know my mind was fried trying to take it all in. So
Can you see the slide now?
yes, and we got it.
Okay,
This is
great.
perfect.
This is perfect.
Thanks, Cheryl.
In January, I filed Senate Bill 60, and it included 12 provisions. One was no-knock arrest warrants. That was clearly stemmed from what happened in Louisville with Breonna Taylor. But just right here in St. Louis County, we had a situation where a woman dog was shot and killed due to a no-knock arrest warrant for an unpaid utility bill. And that was very, very concerning. So I wanted to address no-knock arrest warrants and how they were implemented and how they were how they were granted. Second was prohibit the use of chokeholds. Third was banning sexual conduct between law enforcement and offenders while in custody. This is really important because we've seen situations between law enforcement, but also this applies to correctional facility officers. As we've seen the disarray with the Justice Center and things that are happening where we've seen lawsuits and stories where correctional facility officers or even law enforcement has coerced folks in their custody into doing things that are inappropriate. So now under Senate Bill 60, that would classify that as a Class E felony. Reform of use of force statutes, and then regulations regarding the use of tear gas.
Thank you. And we'll circle back to how this bill proceeded along the path. But first, I'd like to be certain that our viewers are familiar with Senate Bill 26. These were provisions that were really intended to frighten people away from protesting, and they would obviously have a really chilling effect on free speech. We have a slide for that one as well. And if Representative Dogan is here, I'd love to invite him to walk us through that with the clear understanding that this was not a bill that he designed or supported. And if he's not on the call yet, Cheryl, could you walk us through these starting provisions?
Sure. Okay. So we know that Representative Dogan is coming and he'll be able to join us briefly, but SB 26 was a bill that was filed in early January. It had a very early hearing, and it was a bill similar to bills being filed across the country in response to, really frankly, in response to the protests from the summer before. And it started as an anti-protest bill, and it had some very severe language in it. It basically said that there could be felony provisions if you were involved in obstructing traffic as part of a protest, that would be considered a felony. And then if you went to jail, you'd lose your voting rights. It changed the definitions for unlawful assembly, basically making, if 6 people were on a street corner, they could have been determined to be in, unlawfully assembled. It eliminated parole options for individuals who assault law enforcement officers as part of a protest movement. And it also reduced accountability for law enforcement officers who acted abusively during protests. It says protests. So those were just some of the provisions of 26. And it was very alarming. It was a very alarming situation, really a attack on free speech, and really an effort at trying to frighten people who were involved in peaceful protests. And so a large coalition of groups came together throughout the state in an effort to try to change or get rid of SB 26. So I will leave it at that at this
Sure, let's
moment.
talk about one thing with Senate Bill 26. And one, I could speak to it, but clearly I filibustered and defeated that bill in the Senate. And I was strongly opposed to it. What also should be recognized is that the way the process goes is in the Senate, we can offer amendments on the floor to pretty much really derail a bill in a lot of ways by putting language on a bill that potentially folks can't vote for. So to think even through the Senate, my office, we had to figure out how to navigate through that process, which I was strongly opposed, killed the bill, and still was in hope that my Republican colleagues wouldn't kill my bill in exchange for that. And we were able to, one, get Senate bills, get our bill on the calendar, and our bill actually passed out of the Senate that same day, literally like maybe an hour or two before Senate Bill 26 came up. And that pretty much led to a very long day in terms of us getting that bill from moving across the body to the lower chamber. So, that was a horrible bill, but I think just to show you just kind of just the nexus between how we got a positive bill out, but was able to kill a really negative bill that could have easily been added to our bill, but I refused to allow that to happen.
Thank you, Senator Williams, for filling in. And as I'm not sure if Representative Dogan's here, so I'm going to let Nancy take back because we're going to come back to 26 because it did end up in the House and it took some remarkable twists and turns. So, and I understand Senator Representative Dogan is here, and so we'll pick you up in a moment, Representative Dogan. Just thank you for being with us. Go ahead, Nancy. I don't know where you are in your moderation.
Okay, so let's hand it back to Senator Williams for a minute and talk about how Senate Bill 60 somehow was blended with Senate Bill 53 and what that changed and how that either helped or impeded the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So my bill had a hearing in January, right when we came back into session. So the commitments and the promises that were made, that the agreements that we came up to during the interim was honored. And we referred that bill to the Judiciary Committee. It was the first bill really for a Democrat and anybody in the Senate to really come up in the Judiciary Committee that session. So, we were really excited about that. And the timing of a bill coming up in a committee is really important because it allows you time to be able to work it through the process. If it comes up later in the session, then it creates a shorter timeline for the bill to get across the finish line and ultimately to the governor's desk. What we ended up deciding to do with that was I knew that that police residency was a priority for the Senate, for a lot of Senate leadership, for a lot of Senate Republicans. And again, we had just, we don't have a police residency requirement in St. Louis County, but there is one in St. Louis City for 7 years, and then they can move wherever they like. So they lifted the residency requirement for St. Louis during the special session. Everyone in the Senate voted in favor of that, with the exception of 3 state senators. It was myself, Senator Carla May, and at the time, Senator Nasheed. When this came up, I basically said, if you guys were going to move forward with police residency, and last special session, we didn't get anything for it, you guys need to take up police reform. So basically the deal was, if they move forward with police residency for Kansas City, then they needed to take our police reforms with it. So we tied both bills together as a committee substitute, which basically means it's Senate Bill 53 and 60. And if one bill was to not make it across the finish line, the other one wouldn't as well. So it basically tied them both together to where if one moved forward, the other one did. If one was to die, the other bill would die as well.
Thanks. And just to clarify for all of our listeners, when we're referring to police residency requirements, the bills would eliminate the requirement that police in Kansas City live in the city. Is that right?
Yeah, within 30 miles of the police department.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Now, both of these bills were heard, and both this and 26, as I understand it, were heard and voted on. And then we get into this conference committee substitute for the House committee substitute for the Senate committee substitute, which is where most of us get lost. So either Senator Williams or Representative Dogan or both of you, could you sort of spell out where that process went and what all that language is telling us?
Yeah, I can do it. So basically, it was a committee on the Senate side, and I'll let Shamed talk about on the House side. But on the Senate side, basically what we did was we took two Senate bills and in a Senate committee substitute, rolled them together, which ultimately we voted them. Well, they were voted out of that committee together as a Senate committee substitute 53 and 60. And then when we voted it when it got voted out of committee, it went to the Senate floor. And what ended up happening on the Senate floor was that we ended up making modifications to 53, which we changed the original scope of 53 with the miles. They wanted 60. I think we agreed on 30. They wanted to allow folks to be able to live in Kansas and work in Missouri. We said you cannot live outside the state of Missouri. So with changes we made with 53 in terms of the residency for Kansas City. And then with 60, we ended up adding things as well. So we added a use of force database, which was not originally in 60 when we passed it out of committee. We also added wraparound services for police officers. And we ended up adding, and forgive me if I don't remember everything we added in that process, but what I chaired the Black Caucus for the state senators, for the 5 Black state senators, and we made the Black state senators co-sponsors and allowed them to take a priority that a lot of them had been working on since they were in the House, and added it into that bill as well. So that was something that was very important to me. And then of course, I worked with Senator Washington in Kansas City to negotiate the residency for Kansas City, to make sure, as someone that serves in leadership for my caucus, that she was okay with that.
Well, in looking at the list of additions in the slide on the screen, those are again.
Oh yeah, and some of those were also added in the House, and that's where I'll let Shamed kind of jump in and talk about the raised age and expungement reform.
All righty. Welcome, Representative Dogan. We're so glad you were able to join us. I know that schedules can get so complicated, so we're counting ourselves very fortunate today. If there are comments that you'd like to make about the things that got added here to 5360, we'd love to hear those. And then I'd love to get your bird's eye view of some of the positive things that ended up getting added into 26 as well.
Sure. And thank you all for having me. I apologize for coming in late. I had a little schedule mix up there. But I think Senator Williams did a good job of kind of explaining the Senate side and how a lot of those deals came together. The House side was funny enough where we ran into some pretty serious complications with our police reform efforts because I was the sponsor of the companion bill to Senator Williams' original bill, Senate Bill 60, and that was House Bill 876. And so it included the things that we had agreed on with the law enforcement groups and the activist community. It had chokehold provisions. It had some things in there about no-knock warrants, about sex on duty. And that's how it started off originally. And then as they kind of pared a little bit of that down, we did the same thing with my bill in the House. And by the time it got to the House floor, we thought we had everything kind of signed, sealed, and delivered and ready to go. But I ran into some unexpected opposition from Representative Barry Hovis, who is a former police officer from Cape Girardeau. And he added an amendment to my bill that essentially watered down, or I would even say gutted, those provisions on sex on duty and the chokehold provision. And so that kind of stalled us in the process. And we had to go over to the Senate because I think there was some misunderstanding or maybe just disagreement with Representative Hovis and some of our House members who are former law enforcement members, and the law enforcement groups who were supporting Senator Williams and I through this entire process, because that was the thing that we kept going back to was we knew that people would try and characterize our legislation as anti-police or as unnecessary, or tie it in with defund the police and that whole narrative. And we kept going back to them and saying, look, this is supported by the sheriffs, this is supported by the chiefs, this is supported by the FOP, all these organizations. If this was anti-police, surely they would have, raised a red flag or let somebody know. They're the ones leading this process, in fact. And so it really took Senator Williams, Senator Luetkemeyer, and a couple of our House members, Representative David Evans, who's the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, really intervening and getting Representative Hovis to kind of stand down on his objections to the legislation. And at the end of the day, my bill didn't even pass the House. We got kind of hung up in the process, but having those objections be known on a House bill rather than have them hang up the Senate bill when it did reach us really helped us to get through once the Senate bill came over and it went through Representative Evans' committee. And so he was really crucial in terms of getting everybody on board, adding some of those reforms that weren't in either Senator Williams and my original legislation, and getting folks on the House side to support it because he has a lot of credibility because he was a judge down in Howell County in Southwest Missouri for a number of years, very well respected, very well liked among Republicans in the House. And so getting his support especially was really crucial towards getting the Senate bill through.
So it's not always what you know, it's who you know, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And playing that well, bringing people, calling them in as opposed to calling them out, as we like to say. So Representative Dogan, if I could stay with you for a couple of more minutes, we know that in the end, SB 26 got all sorts of positive things added to it and some of the worst elements eliminated or diluted. And I believe that you were part of that process from the committee substitute point of view. Can you shed some light for us on what some of those positive additions were? And for our participants, we have a slide to help you sort through this as well.
Yeah, of course. I think Senate Bill 26 was always going to be a tough vote for myself and for other members of the Black Caucus because of the anti-protester language that was originally included, as well as just the law enforcement Bill of Rights. A lot of us do have just some serious concerns about that language, but it kind of ebbed and flowed because there were things added in the House. Originally, when that bill came to the House floor, Senate Bill 26, I added on the language from Senator Williams in my police reform bill. And I thought that might be, it's always helpful to have more than one pathway to get your legislation passed. And so I thought, hey, this vehicle is moving, let's put it on there and see where it goes. And so we did that initially. It was taken out of the conference committee report, though. One thing that was added that stayed in Senate Bill 26 that was really kind of a pleasant surprise was language involving juvenile offenders. We call it the Bobby Bostic language because Bobby Bostic is this very unique case where he was sentenced to a very lengthy, I think it was 200 years in prison. So it's not technically a life sentence, but it is a life sentence, obviously, if you get that many years. And other states have since changed their laws on juvenile sentencing so that nobody could get that kind of a sentence and that people who were in his situation would be released. But Representative Schroer, who was the House handler of Senate Bill 26 and who's worked on Bobby Bostic's case for a number of years, was able to insert that language to make Bobby eligible for parole. So that will take place this week, August 28th, when the legislation goes into effect. And by all accounts, he is somebody who's had pretty good behavior when he's been in prison and would be a pretty good candidate for parole. And so just doing kind of restorative justice to somebody like that, that was something that I was grateful to see in that bill, even though I didn't support the bill overall. We also included some expungement reforms, some of which were also included in Senate Bills 53 and 60. And some of the use of force language was included in there. So, a lot of things end up being duplicates. They end up in multiple bills that pass. And so there ended up being a decent amount of overlap in some of the reform pieces of 26 and 53.
Thank you for all of that clarification. And so the session moves along, and how down to the wire did this process go?
It was the second last day, right, Senator?
Yeah, it was the second to last day. But I think it's so important that people understand, even with Senate Bill 26, so it was still a different approach in the Senate with that bill, because I only really counted on one vehicle for us because I didn't support 26 and I voted against it. So I didn't really want any of my bill, I didn't even want it in the bill at all. So I knew I wasn't going to vote for it. It just wasn't an option for us. But Shamed made another really interesting point on how we had to be really intentional about the bill handlers. And he was a very big help to us in the Senate because Senator Luke DeMeyer and I had never served in the state house. So it was a lot of members that we didn't know and just wasn't familiar with. So he really helped identify who key people were in the House to be able to work with to get this bill across the finish line. And then I think it's so important that everyone understand, because of the way that our process worked, it's not always about who name is on the bill. Yes, my name is on the bill, but it was so many moving parts and people that played such a significant role in just working through the ins and outs of getting that bill through both chambers. And I think people really got to understand that the timing of everything was so important because the Senate literally shut down like the next day. So had we not gotten that bill out when we did, it would have been virtually impossible for it to get to the governor's desk.
Well, and speaking to getting to the governor's desk, was there ever any concern on either of your parts that the governor might refuse to sign it, or was that you felt safe about that? What was the status there?
No, I wasn't worried about that. I think we did a good job of making sure that there was nothing in the bill that could be vetoed. There was one particular provision that we had to work through in the Senate. They wanted to add some type of subpoena language that the governor was not in favor of, but we were able to get that out in the conference committee. So everything that the governor would have potentially vetoed, we made sure was not in the bill.
So there was strategy there too, not just goodwill.
Yeah, I don't know if the governor was happy about signing the bill. That's something you would have to ask him. But, and honestly, at this point, I think, I don't know if a lot of my Republican colleagues were happy about voting for the bill at this point once they saw how it turned out at the end of the day. But you know, I know it was nothing in the bill that the governor's office wanted to veto. But I also think it's another point that we need to make that I think sometimes get lost in translation was that you know, the death of George Floyd was made clear. You know, it was on video, so we saw why chokehold should be treated the same as deadly force. And privately, people across the political spectrum said they agreed with us. You know, I decided to move that encouragement and support out of the shadows and onto the Senate floor. And I think it's important that folks know that compromise is not a dirty word. You know, it's not an us versus them situation. We just really brought people with different perspectives together and helped them find common ground.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit there, Senator. I think that people on the Republican
Not that much common ground, huh?
I think people on the Republican side, when we did get to our final package, they were glad to support it. And they were glad because we had support not just from the law enforcement organizations, you know, the chiefs, the sheriffs, and all of them, but the fact that it got sign off from our colleagues who are in law enforcement. I mean, I've been there for 7 years, and every year you have people who are elected who are former police chiefs or former police officers or whatnot, and those people hold a lot of sway up in Jefferson City. They kind of determine what the boundaries of discussion are going to be when it comes to public safety type issues. And, you know, from the get-go, I've been butting heads with a lot of these people because a lot of them have opposed reforms that, you know, I've proposed, that Democrat colleagues have proposed year after year after year. And this was the year that we finally got those folks to buy in. And I think it's the groundwork that Senator Williams and I helped to lay when we did have those discussions with the law enforcement groups, but also some of those one-on-one conversations we had when we hit that roadblock with Barry Hovis, Representative Hovis. We had some very frank conversations with him and with some of my other colleagues who are former police officers, and just drove home the point to them that this is essential towards you guys helping to improve the perception and the ability of people in your profession to do their jobs. I mean, if we went another year without doing police reform in this state, the message that would send to people wanting to sign up to be police officers, even, that we're not going to hold anybody accountable. That's not a message the police chiefs need, because they need to hire good people. And so I think that having that in place and having true bipartisan support to the point where we had, I think it was maybe just a handful of people who voted no on the bill in either chamber, really speaks volumes to the popularity of police reform in both parties.
Yeah, and you know, and Shamed, I agree with that. You know, this is what happens when hard work and relationship building comes into play. But we also have to acknowledge that if either one of us had been unwelcoming or burned bridges along the way, this bill would not have been a success. So by the time that it came to conference, people were reasonable and approachable and sincere about it. And we've seen plenty of times, at least in the Senate, I've seen what happens when a senator puts their issue front and center and then throw their weight around trying to force it through, and it ultimately fails. So we were very intentional about building a consensus and not demand blind allegiance.
So interesting. The next question I had on my agenda was to ask you about what you thought influenced people who would typically might oppose some of these measures to come together. And you've already answered it, that it really was about being open, building consensus, not being bomb throwers about the whole thing. Not that figurative bomb throwing doesn't sometimes have its place, but obviously you made a really profound case for bridge building. So if I understood you correctly, these bills, all of these will go into effect on the 28th, is that right?
Yes, Saturday. And it's an important piece that we need to talk about that I don't know if either one of us touched on, and that's the motion to vacate. This bill when it goes into a law on the 28th of August, it would allow now prosecutors, local prosecutors, to provide significant evidence to be able to hopefully help folks who may have been wrongfully convicted of a crime like Lamar Johnson or Kevin
Yeah.
Strickland. So this bill is going to be a game changer, not only in terms of expungement and police accountability, but folks who may have been wrongfully accused could potentially have their freedom through this bill. And as Shamed stated earlier, I spent a couple hours in Jefferson City Correctional Facility with Bobby Bostic. And to think that he's been in prison since he was a teenager, he's now 42, and has gotten an undergrad degree and is in the process of getting his master's degree, all since he's been incarcerated pretty much majority of his life.
Well, once again, you guys are just immediately one step ahead of my questions. But I'm going to go ahead and ask it because there's probably even more to say on this topic. And that was, once these go in effect, what's the sort of new world of criminal justice in Missouri that you envision? What will no longer, hopefully no longer happen that has in the past? And the reverse of that, what empowering things will happen that were not previously available to people?
Yeah, I think the fact that no one's going to be choked to death like George Floyd and not be held accountable, that's huge. The fact that, and it's still just, every time I say it, it's unbelievable, but officers can't have sex with people on duty anymore in the state of Missouri. That we will finally recognize that an officer is in an inherent power dynamic that leads to not being able to consent to sex with a police officer. So they won't be able to do that anymore. Those two are pretty big game changers, but also the provision Brian just mentioned, being able to have people get justice finally who've been wrongfully convicted of crimes and who are sitting in there, because we know our criminal justice system does not have a perfect rate. There are some errors that are always made, just as there are in any profession. And we are now giving prosecutors the ability to go back on some of those cases where they couldn't before, and where our attorney general would fight them tooth and nail before. They are now going to have the ability to go through that process and get justice for these people, because every day that somebody who's not guilty is sitting incarcerated, that's not only injustice to them, that's an injustice to the victim, because the perpetrator is still out there somewhere.
Yeah, the bill also includes something that we'll be focusing on quite a bit and be looking to you all as partners, is the expungement. This bill would change the expungement law in Missouri, which for a nonviolent state offense today, you would have to wait 7 years after being removed from supervised release to be eligible for an expungement. This bill will lower that number to 3 years. And for a misdemeanor nonviolent offense, it would go from 3 years to 1 year after being removed from supervised release or probation. So that's going to be a game changer as we think about getting folks back into the workforce who may have served their debt to society, can ultimately become model citizens. The other element is we executed we eliminated the execution of a warrant arrest. So in my district, I have 35 municipalities. My district goes from Interstate 40 to St. Charles County. So I have communities like Ferguson, where I grew up, Kinloch, Berkeley. A lot of those municipalities that were known for using people as personal ATMs. Now, if someone was to have a municipal violation and it led to a warrant arrest, they don't have to by law arrest them. They can give them a second chance to get that taken care of, and move on and get their kids to school or get to work and not have to continue to carry a burden of the car being towed or their kids being, sent off somewhere while they're in jail. So that's going to be huge in terms of building the trust between law enforcement and the community by giving them that tool. We also raised the age back up to 18 for a juvenile being housed with an adult prisoner in a correctional facility. So now, when I toured St. Louis County Jail with Doug Burris, the director there, there's a 15-year-old there, which my office will be writing a letter to have him housed with juveniles, because under the current law, someone under the age of 18 can still be housed with an adult. So this bill raises that age back to 18. Another really important piece too that we have to acknowledge is with this bill, you also are going to be able to ensure that women in correctional facilities have access to feminine hygiene products.
So I'm curious as to the extent to which there's sort of a victory lap tour on your agenda, not so much to pat yourselves on the back, but to make the average Missourian aware of really how, I mean, I think many people might suspect that a lot of the provisions in this bill had been the case all along and really did not understand how skewed and unjust many of our criminal justice practices were. Are there ways to use this as a platform to make the general public just more informed, and to maybe bash some of the negative assumptions that have grown out of this less than equitable criminal justice?
Yeah, you all are already taking positive steps. My office had a very great meeting yesterday about opportunities to partner to do expungement clinics with NCJW, STL, and JCRC. And of course, we've spoken with the Urban League and as well as Mission STL to start working with folks to inform them first, and then ultimately host expungement clinics to get their records cleared. The other thing I think is going to be really important is having town halls and dialogue like this so people understand what's happening in Jefferson City. A lot of people didn't know our healthcare systems were, or just the way our country treats people when it comes to healthcare was dysfunctional until a pandemic. We have to start taking proactive steps around policy in our state and ultimately in our country, because no one thinks it's a big deal until it happens to them. And I think that's why having these conversations is so important. And I think the more that we do it, we'll be able to get people engaged around the benefits of it, just like we did as we talked about getting the bill across the finish line from the beginning.
Terrific. Let me remind all of our participants that if you have questions, you are welcome to put them into the chat. I also see in the chat that there is a rally in Jeff City on Monday in support of the release of Lamar Johnson. And if the person who put that in the chat can add to the chat a link or dates or times or where people can get more information about that, that would be super helpful. There was a question about the original language in 26 that made traffic obstruction a felony, and was that indeed stripped out of the bill, and if so, how did that happen?
It didn't pass. That they took that out, so
Okay.
that never passed. We never even let that out the Senate.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
I mean, we would have never let that come out of the Senate.
Okay. And while we're waiting for other questions in the chat, the one that occurs to me is, how does the process that was so successful in this case lay any groundwork for future collaborations, both bipartisan and between members of the two chambers, which is obviously also very important? And if so, are there specific topics that perhaps the two of you are looking at? And in the big picture, how can we as the public help support that?
Yeah, I think Shamed and I kind of got the blueprint, so I think we can go back and do some cool stuff next year, you know, if the opportunity allows. But for me, you know, if it's ways we can continue to focus on this. A lot of groups have reached out to my office about revisiting some things that we didn't get done in Senate Bill 60 the original format. So we are exploring that. But for me personally, I'm going to be focusing on reducing violent crime by addressing its root issues. So I'll be dug into education, employment, mental health services is something. Also looking at some unconventional approaches. So studies that show vacant properties lead to higher crime rates. We're going to put some money behind clearing out some properties and cleaning up areas. I also appropriated $500,000 to Harris Stowe in partnership with Lincoln University to allow students to participate in the police cadet program while concurrently getting their criminal justice degree. So we can work towards getting more police officers in the police department, but ultimately those that reflect the identity of the communities that they serve. And then I also serve as the assistant Democratic leader in the Senate. So I'll be very committed to helping members of our caucus get priorities and things they want to get done across the finish line as well.
Yeah, I think next year is going to be really tough for us to get really substantial legislation through, which was why it was so critical that we were able to do this year. Next year is going to be an election year. It's also a redistricting year. We just recently had new census data, and the governor announced that he is not going to call us into a special session for the purpose of congressional redistricting. So we are going to have to take up a substantial amount of time in our legislative session redrawing our congressional districts, because that is the one thing that we do with the redistricting in the legislature. We do not draw our own lines for the state house or the state senate. That is done by an independent bipartisan commission, but we do draw the lines for the members of Congress. And so that is going to take a substantial amount of time and energy. There's a number of our colleagues who have either announced or are going to announce that they're wanting to run for Congress, so that complicates things. And so that's just going to, take a little bit of our time and energy from legislation that we would otherwise be focusing on. But I am hoping that we can come together on some other criminal justice reforms that are undone. Next year is going to be my last year in the House, and so I'm going to be trying to work on getting us to finally actually raise the age for juveniles, because right now you can be prosecuted as an adult at the age of 12. And that is just ridiculous. Everything we know about childhood development and brain development at that age shows that you are not remotely morally responsible or at the same capacity as an adult until you're in your mid-20s. So at the very least, we ought to be talking about raising that from 12 to 14 or 16 at the very least. So I'm filing that legislation again. I think one of the other things that we have to do as a broader picture is that we have to give our law enforcement officers the resources to be able to combat violent crime. And so, that's something that the legislature is always interested in, but particularly as we talk about trying to attract more people to our region in St. Louis, and getting, I'm very supportive of getting those refugees from Afghanistan to come here. I'm grateful that we're going to be accepting 1,000 of them very soon. But if we want to keep refugees and keep people moving into this state and into this region in the long term, we have to get violent crime under control. And so, police reform is a big part of that. And also, I think legalizing marijuana, the little more controversial issue, but our officers spend an inordinate amount of time going after people for marijuana possession. 10% of our arrests in the state of Missouri are for marijuana possession only. And so every minute that an officer is spending chasing down or arresting or citing somebody for marijuana possession, that's time that they're not taking to investigate a murder case or to investigate a robbery or a rape or something like that. And so I want to try and focus on getting that legalized so that, our officers can free themselves up to deal with the people who are real threats to our society, not people who are smoking cannabis.
Yeah.
So I am so grateful, and I know that we all are, for your spending this time with us today, as well as for the countless hours of work that went into getting these measures passed. We are at our time limit. We do have some supplemental materials that I understand we'll be emailing to the participants on the call to help you keep track of what was being said. I'm going to toss it back to Cheryl for her final words on today's session.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much for moderating this. It was very complicated, and for some of those people on the call, especially those of us who work with Empower Missouri's Smart Sentencing Commission, Smart Sentencing Coalition, we followed the nitty gritty here. We followed the twists and turns, and so it's. As a matter of fact, I can remember conversations that we had with Senator Williams right after 5360 got combined, saying, what happened to our bill and how can we support this now? And he's like, just be patient. So there was just great lessons here for advocates in terms of there was a strategy in place. And then when we saw all these little bills being introduced on both the House side and the Senate side, it started to become obvious what was going on. But we need to have faith in you all, that you have your strategy in place, and we're glad that you've put a blueprint in place. There were so many provisions of these bills that we haven't even had a chance to touch on, things that a lot of advocates have been working on: alternative sentencing, expungement, a lot of other things around juveniles. So there was just no way to get into every detail, but we'll try to send some of that out. Empower Missouri did a fabulous job documenting both bills. And with their permission, I will send out their summaries, because really what you both accomplished this year with your colleagues was remarkable. So we appreciate the time. Somebody did mention, this is a huge thing happening on the 28th. Is there going to be some PR? Are you guys going to do something that really lines out these major provisions to make sure that the public knows what's happening? Because there's some great stuff that you were able to make happen in a very difficult climate. So
yeah,
thank you both.
We have a piece that's in the Post-Dispatch that Rob from my staff will post in the link, but also please go to our site, senatorbrianwilliams.com. So we'll be providing updates and also more information as things roll out with the bill as it goes into law this weekend.
We look forward to supporting both of your efforts next year in the General Assembly. You let us know how we can help, but we'll be watching and waiting to jump in. Thank you all. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. We had about 60 people on the call. We appreciate all of you taking time today. It has been recorded. We'll make sure you get this out. We'll get it out to you so you have it. Everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your partnership.